All right, we're recording. Perfect. Good evening, everybody. Has everyone had dinner already? I have not, so I won't stand in the way of our dinner. Remember, this is a flash talk, so we're going to go quick here. But I'm glad that you are here. As Jared mentioned, my name is Abby Lowry. I'm the Information Literacy Librarian at the Knight-Capron Library, which basically means that I do most of the instruction. So if you come into the library, probably not this semester, but maybe in semesters past and hopefully coming up in the future, you will see me or one of my colleagues in the library classroom, and we'll talk about how to find library resources. So for my part of the talk tonight, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to go over how to find evidence to support your research assignment. I'm sure that many of you have research papers, projects, presentations, things like that coming up in these last couple weeks of the semester. And my goal tonight is for you to leave with an idea of how you can find the evidence to support that. And then my friends in the Writing Center are going to show you how to actually put those things into work for your papers. So let me go ahead and start presenting. I do have some slides for us. All right. Perfect. So am I sharing right now? Somebody give me a shout out with a yes. Is it working?
Yes. You are.
Thank you, JR. Thanks. All right. So finding sources by the Knight-Capron Library. Here we go. All right. So most often when students come to the librarians with questions about a research assignment, they are often overwhelmed. And we find that it's usually because there hasn't been much planning in advance. I find that students tend to kind of dive in with a search without really having a good sense of what they need to get out of that search or what exactly they're looking for. So I like to start with these 4 pretty basic questions when I'm doing a research appointment with a student or even when I'm offering instruction. So the questions are there on the screen. I promise I'm not going to read all these slides to you, but the first one we're going to talk about is obviously what information do you need? Obviously the most important step, right? What are you looking for? What do you need? So what information do I need? Most of the time that is going to come from your assignment instructions. So your professor, if they've given you an assignment, have most likely told you you need to find, 3 to 5 scholarly articles. You need to find 3 to 5 websites. Maybe you need data. Maybe you need lab reports, depending on your subject area. Most of the time, that's going to actually be in the assignment that you've been given. At least that's been my experience at the library. The number one thing that we have been seeing is that students need scholarly journal articles. Hopefully this is holding true for most of you, right? Scholarly articles is the big one. So what are those things? All right, so scholarly journal articles, AKA peer-reviewed academic articles. I'm sure you have heard those terms by now at this point in the semester, and maybe you have an understanding already of what those are. But essentially that means that these are kind of the most credible sources you can find. So they've been written and reviewed by experts in their fields. These are the kind of publications that your professors are working on in all their spare time, the limited spare time that they have. They've been written for other experts. And essentially, like I said, these are things that hold the most credibility in academia, essentially. So, and again, peer review, you're going to find that term a lot, and potentially it's something that you've actually experienced in maybe a writing class. So if you've ever turned in a paper and then had to have other classmates read it and give you some feedback, that's what I mean by peer review. It's just at a bigger scale. So your professor might submit some research they've been working on for years to some of their peers or to a journal. The journal would send it out to some of their colleagues and they would ascertain whether or not this is legit or not. So that's why there's always such a big focus on scholarly articles. And that's what we're going to focus on tonight. So again, because scholarly articles are the question that we get the most about in the library, those are the kind of sources we're going to look for tonight. Okay, so the next question after you've figured out what you're looking for, and remember tonight we're looking for scholarly sources, is where should I look? I know that some of you just screamed Google, and that's fine, fair enough, but tonight we're going to look at the library. And hopefully this is not the first time you have seen the library website. There's the homepage for you laid out. If it is, if you're not familiar with the library website, I would recommend that after we're done tonight, oops, trying to send me updates here. After we're done tonight, I would love for you to visit the library website and bookmark it. In that sense, it will be as easy for you to find as a Google site would be. It'll be easier for you to get back to that way. So after we're done, we're all agreed, we're going to bookmark the library site. We're all nodding, I can tell. Okay, cool. So Looking at the library website, really quickly, I want to point out one search. So you can see that's this catalog, or sorry, it's this box right in the front staring right at us. This is the library catalog. You've probably used one maybe in high school, maybe you've used one search since you've been here. But this gives you access to all of the library's physical holdings, all of our books, everything you actually see when you come into the building, as well as a lot of our electronic resources. And electronic resources include those scholarly journal articles that we're talking about. So they're articles that are published online. It's a great tool when you are getting started or if your search is pretty broad. But since we know we're looking for scholarly articles right now, we're actually going to dig into an article database instead. Okay, so I'm throwing around a lot of new terms, right? So we've got scholarly articles, those are the best of the best, and then databases. So A to Z database list, you can find that on the library website under our research tab. And I'm actually gonna take you there now so you can see what it looks like. So from the library's website, research, A to Z list, we've got over 100 of these things. Currently we have 155, and this number goes up and down depending on what kind of trials and things we have. So I'm telling you to use a database, right, to find an article. And you're probably thinking, which one am I supposed to use if there are 155? You can narrow this list down a lot. We've got this subjects filter up here at the top, and there's a category for every area of study here at Lynchburg. So let's say you are somebody who's studying psychology. We've got 44 databases just for you. And these are our best bets that we've pulled out. So you could choose one from this list, and away you go. You could find some research for an assignment that you have. Tonight, we are representing a number of different majors, I'm sure. So we're going to keep things fair. I'm going to take us back to this main list, and we're actually going to search within Academic Search Complete. It's a big, broad, multidisciplinary database, which just means that it covers a lot of different subject areas, so it's useful to a lot of students. Okay, but before we actually dive into it, we're going to talk about how we're going to search it. So again, I feel like when I speak with students when they come in for research appointments or maybe they're chatting for help, they haven't thought too much about what exactly it is that they're looking for or how to get to it. And sometimes stepping back and taking just a few minutes to plan out your search ahead of time can make a world of difference in what you can find. A big difference between search engines like Google and library databases are that they are focused on a controlled vocabulary. Again, some library language that I'm throwing out at you, but it just means that you can't plug in huge long phrases and expect to get search results. You're going to have to be more focused with your searches. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you just think about the keywords before you actually start your search. So we're identifying main concepts. And then I really have this last point too, I think is important, and it's keeping track of the terms you discover during your research. So actually writing down or making note of the search terms that are working for you is going to be invaluable in terms of replicating searches later if you're having to search multiple times, or just being able to get back to sources if you lost track. So we're taking good notes and we're making note of keywords ahead of time for sure. So let's look at an example of what I'm talking about. All right, so I came with this research question. What is the impact of college binge drinking on school performance? All right, so we talked about coming up with keywords or main concepts, right? And so we're just pulling out what the main ideas are from this research question. Again, you could copy and paste this entire thing into Google and you would get some results, right? That's not going to work in Academic Search Complete. You have to be more direct. So some potential keywords. And again, this is obvious, guys, right? So we've pulled out college, binge drinking, school performance. Those are the big points. But the other thing to pay attention to when you're searching databases is looking for synonyms. So what is another way that someone might describe college students or school performance? And I came up with some already. Typically in class, I would make you guys do this for me. So binge drinking, maybe alcohol abuse or alcohol use. I thought I had a list twice there for a second. And then school performance, you might instead say something like grades or student success. So thinking about these things in advance, again, is going to help you get the most out of your search results. All right, so let's go ahead and play around with the database and see what exactly this looks like in practice. All right, so who remembers how to get there? We go up to research, A to Z databases list. And again, we're just playing around with Academic Search Complete for now. Good. And if you're working from off campus, you may run into, or you will run into, the need to enter in your University of Lynchburg credentials. So it's just something to be aware of. It doesn't stop you from being able to use this tool, but if you're using it off campus, it is going to ask you to verify who you are before it'll let you in, because these are all paid subscriptions by the library. Okay, so let's use some of those terms we just talked about. So let's try college students, and you can see Academic Search Complete wants to be like Google so bad, right? It really wants to be easier to use. So it's already showing us some of those synonyms that we talked about, and even some we didn't think of. So undergraduate, that's a great one. So that means we're going to be searching for all of those things, which is helpful. Our other phrase, we're talking about binge drinking, right? And you can see that it's also giving us some synonyms for that as well. I'm just going to leave it as binge drinking for right now. We can play around with synonyms later if we need to. And then it was student success. Let's just try grades. And again, you can see it's offering, ooh, what about academic performance? Okay, so we've got a lot of search terms up here. And just because I am filling out every field does not mean that you would need to do that for your search. That just depends on how complex your search is. Sometimes I tell students just to make use of one or two at first, and then maybe add a third if they need to narrow down further. But the only other thing I want to point out before we actually hit that search button is this button off the left here, or this box where it says and. You can see we've got it connecting all of our fields here. And what that's telling us is that the database is going to search for all of these terms together. So college students and binge drinking and grades and all the synonyms that are included there as well. So we're not just going to end up with either or of those things. It's only looking for things that contain all those terms. So it's a way of narrowing down our search. We are not going to worry about any of these filters so far. We're just going to hit search and see what we get. All right, 56 search results. I'm pretty happy with that. If you are getting results in the thousands or even the hundreds, you may want to play around with your search terms, maybe add some more, maybe try to be more specific, because that probably means you're way too broad. If you ended up with a goose egg here, or maybe just 3 or 4, you may want to mess around with maybe some synonyms or some ways to expand your search. All right, we've got 56. Again, that's pretty good, but I still want to talk about the limiters, or the refining results things options that we have over here on the left. So remember we talked about your assignment instructions, right? So your professor told you that you needed scholarly articles. They likely, or sometimes, they give you parameters like these need to be published within the last 5 to 10 years. So you've got this date filter here, and we can push it forward. And let's just do, let's say 2010. So we're narrowing down the publication date. You can see we've cut our number down, so now we've got 39, still a great number. Other things we want to talk about is, again, we're talking about scholarly, peer-reviewed academic journals, right? All synonyms, really, for the most part. And so we can narrow down that way. Most of the time when you are searching in these databases, you are going to be getting those academic, top of the top type articles. But as you can see in this search, we did get some magazines, some newspapers. Those are legitimate sources, but they're not scholarly. So let's narrow down to academic. Okay, cool. And we already saw it was going to be 35. And I'll just point out that there are a number of other ones that might be useful. Things like geography. If you just want to focus on students in the United States, you could narrow down that way. If you just want to focus on Connecticut, you could do it that way. Language is an option as well. So sometimes useful. All right, so you've got our 35 results. Again, you could always play around with search terms if you weren't happy with that number, but I think that's a fine one. And typically what I do is I just scroll through and find a title that sticks out to me or seems particularly relevant for my topic. So, I mean, this one seems perfect, doesn't it? This is assessing drinking and academic performance among, okay, yeah, this is great. This is spot on. So if I click on, it isn't always this easy, by the way. I did this one ahead of time. Okay, so number 4, we'll click on the title, and we are taken to a more detailed item record of the article. More detailed because it offers us all of our citation information up here at the top. You can see it comes from the Journal of Drug Issues back in 2016. We've got our authors listed here. We've got an abstract as well. Abstract is just a summary. It's a great thing to read or look over before you decide whether this is something you actually want to invest your time in reading. The other thing that's really important to make note of here are the subject terms or the author supplied keywords. So remember, we came up with our own keywords at the beginning. These are the ones that the author of this article decided were worthwhile. GPA is not one I had thought of. GPA is a great one. So the reason these are blue is that they are hyperlinked. So they are going to take you to articles that share that same subject term or topic. So let's say you need, again, 5 sources for your paper. You might want to click on these to find some related articles to help you expand your reference list, essentially. We've been talking about this in the library, but we like to refer to them or compare them to hashtags in social media. So just like a hashtag on Instagram, you would click on these to be taken to everything that's related to it. Okay, so we've got all the information here. We've got our abstract. The most important thing is that we actually want to read it, right? So to find the full text, it's going to look a little bit different depending on the database that you're in. In this one, you can see the link for full text is up here on the left. Sometimes it'll be on the right. It's usually near the top, essentially. This one, it says check for full text. Sometimes there will be a direct link to a PDF, but let's just, essentially, we just follow the clicks until we find the full text. With this one, it looks like we've got 2 options to view it. We'll just go with the first one. And it's thinking. It's hopefully taking us there. Excellent. Okay, so we've got the full text here, just in HTML. We've also got a PDF option. This one's really nice and clean and straightforward. And we've got some ways to save this as well. That's something I really want you to be aware of as well when you are searching in article databases. The way that you save these things is really important because I want you to be able to find them again. If you were to copy and paste from the search bar up at the top in any database, it's likely going to be a dead link later. So I want you to always be looking for ways to either download the full text if you got it, look for a permalink. So here you've got a DOI, or in this case, there's even an option to email. I'm going to take you back to our search results and show you that there are ways to do that from this page as well. So let's say you were like, okay, I know there's full text there. I don't want to read it right now. I just want to save this permalink to a Google Doc, or save the permalink, or email it to myself would be a great option. We have some other tools to do this for the library that I don't have time to show you now, but if you want to learn more about that, we can talk about it after. But I'll take you back to the result list real quick. We're wrapping up here. Just to review quickly, remember we had our research question at the beginning. We broke it down into search terms that were easy for the database to find sources. We took advantage of some of the synonyms there. Again, this looks like a pretty complex search with the synonyms we used, and we used all 3 fields. They don't always have to look that way. Sometimes they'll look even more complex though. We also took advantage of the limits on the left-hand side with the date, academic journals. Could have used more if we wanted to. A little shortcut just in case, like you absolutely are doing your work the night before, would be to click on the full text link to make sure you can get to full text. Sometimes there are hiccups with that. We might have to request the full text from another library. So if you are someone who does work the night before, that's me, no shame. You might want to click on that to be sure that it's immediately available to you. If you've got time though, don't limit yourself that way. Okay, so that's it for this database. The last thing I want to go over really quickly, and taking longer than I wanted to, is how can I get help? I feel like anytime I wrap up a session with students, this is the most important thing I want you to leave with, is how you can get help after our session today. So how can you get help? Going back to the library's website, there are a number of ways, and that is the university's website. Here we go. This chat button, which has been following me around throughout our session, maybe you noticed it. It actually pinged me to ask a question earlier. If you click on the chat bubble, put in your name and your question, and you can chat with a librarian. During the week, there's a librarian or a staff member on here until late into the night. We're on here Saturdays and Sundays as well. So if you are stuck on trying to find full text, if you can't find any articles in your search, ask us that question. We're happy to answer it. The other way to get help that's really useful is to actually schedule a research appointment. So under Get Help, Research Appointments, you can schedule a time to speak with a librarian. This is really nice because on the next screen, it would ask you to put in what your research topic is. So the librarian can prepare in advance and maybe pull some sources for you. We already know what we're getting into. So research appointments, chatting with us is great. The last option I will talk about is under tutorials. We have a bunch of these. So we just went through Academic Search Complete, right? That's just one database. There are a lot of them, as you saw, and we've made tutorials and tip sheets accordingly for some of the other ones. So if you were trying to explore a different database or a different tool on our website and you're getting a little lost, you can see we've even got videos on how to use OneSearch. Similarly, we have videos and tip sheets on how to use some of the other databases. So if you're not comfortable speaking with a librarian, this might be a good resource for you to check out as well. But with that, I will stop sharing and I will head back. Oops, wrong thing. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any right now. And if not, again, the chat, research appointments, we love answering questions, so please take advantage. But I'm here and I have another minute before I want to toss it over because it was supposed to be a flash talk. So questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or just, yeah, make yourself known. All right, and that's fine. If there are no questions right now, I'm sure they will come up as you are doing research. I should have mentioned too that with the research appointments, most of those that we are doing this semester are happening online. Most of them are happening in like a chat forum. We have a way to screen share with each other, but we do also have the option to meet in person if you really prefer that. We have a sneeze guard set up and everything so that we can talk in person if we need to. But yeah, with that, my part is done, Jer.
Thank you so much, Abby. That was really helpful, and we appreciate it. So again, I'm Jer Bryan. I'm the director of Wilmer Writing Center, and I have some wonderful tutors with me. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Mahika, move to Julia, and then Alexis.
Hey everyone, my name is Mahika. I'm one of the graduate assistants at Wilmer Writing Center, and I'm also a master's student at the university in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling program.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm the supervising tutor at the Writing Center, and I'm a political science major and a senior.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexis and I work at the Writing Center and I'm currently a junior and a double major in criminology and international relations with a focus in security studies.
Okay, thanks so much, y'all. So let's go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen and then I'll just get Mahika to let me know if you all can see it. Give me just a second.
Yes, you're good to go.
Thank you. Okay. Here we go.
So the purpose of our presentation tonight is to talk to you about what is synthesizing, and this is something that a lot of you will be doing in your papers that you have coming up. So we like to think about when you're writing a paper, it's really introducing a conversation because it's you having a conversation with your sources, and it's also your sources having a conversation with each other, which is what we call synthesizing. So whenever you synthesize in your paper, it's adding additional layers of support for the argument you're making, and then it's also bringing in some opposition and some responses, which will strengthen your argument. Next slide. So why synthesize? Often the scholarly audiences that you're writing for will require you to have more than one piece of evidence and support. And with that being said, you'll have to have your different sources address each other. That way they can properly be explained in your paper. So whenever you synthesize, it provides more than one writer's view, and it demonstrates a high level of critical thinking, which the scholarly audiences ask for whenever you're writing these papers for them. And then it can also confirm the typicality of evidence of an event or a claim. So in your papers, if you only had one source with a claim and then all of your other sources were claiming something else, this may not be a very typical claim, which is why we ask that people have multiple sources which all say the same thing. So a question that's rhetorical that we have for you is, in a court case, would one witness be enough to prove your guilt or innocence? Next slide. So these are some questions that you should ask yourself before you even start the writing process, whenever you're just thinking about the direction that your paper is going to go in. And you should be asking yourself, do multiple sources agree on a point, a claim, or an opinion? Does one source disagree with another about a point, a claim, or an opinion? And does one source add to an exclamation, a discussion, or a point of another source, which will all contribute to how you synthesize your sources and how your sources interact with one another? Next slide.
So we have some examples coming up for you all. We're going to show you examples of synthesizing opposition and also agreement. And these samples are all formatted in MLA 8th edition. So you will not see pagination because they're web sources.
So the first example is an opposition one. So while some claim that prisoners are unable to fully give consent for organ donation, others claim that there is no evidence that prisoners are unable to do so. This sample expresses opposition that the prisoners cannot consent. It also offers a response that there is no concrete proof of that claim. So it's showing you two authors in opposition with each other, saying, well, this is one idea and this is the other idea, and it's putting them right next to each other so you can see that they hold two opposing views. Next slide, please. This is another one for opposition. Shannon Ross, who is currently serving a prison sentence, disagrees with ethics professor Lawrence Gostin, whereas Gostin claims that prisoners could be coerced to donate organs. Ross argues that all donation is, in fact, coerced. Perhaps Ross means that most people feel compelled to donate organs to loved ones and that some may even fear judgment if they do not volunteer. Thus, coercion is part of the decision to donate organs, even for non-prisoners. Again, we see opposition concerning coercion and a response. So you see in red and then blue, you show one opinion and then the other. And then you see a little bit of an explanation in, say, your own words to explain in further detail what that means. Next slide, please. So the third example is an agreement. Shannon Ross, an inmate, argues that there are practices to ensure that donate organs from willing prisoners are healthy. He argues that testing is over 90% accurate. Like Ross, Sally Sattel, a scholar and a professor, argues that prisoners can be tested and quarantined after their testing to ensure they are disease-free. Here we see two sources agree about one point, that willing prisoners can donate healthy organs. So you see kind of it flows from one into the next. You just seamlessly go from source A to source B saying that prisoners can have healthy organs to donate. Next slide, please.
So one thing that we want to be aware of when we're dealing with more than one source in a particular spot in our paper, we need to be aware of transitions. So there are a couple transitional expressions that might help you. If you are trying to express agreement, you could use the phrase "in fact" or "in addition," "furthermore," "additionally." And if you're trying to respond to opposition, which I know a lot of first-year writers have to use opposition in their essays, you could respond by saying "nevertheless," "on the contrary," "yet," or "however."
So you should begin your synthesizing process in the pre-writing stages of your paper because you really have to think about how these sources are going to interact with one another, and that'll determine how you discuss them in your paper. So the steps that kind of go for this in the different tiers at the more basic level is summarizing, and then you then turn to analysis, and then synthesizing is at a higher tier than either of those. So that's the process that you should be thinking about whenever you're going through these sources and thinking about how they're going to fit into your paper. Next slide. So the synthesis matrix is something that's very common for science majors, and it's going to be a chart that we'll show you on the next slide, but it tracks points for each source and has categories that you'll put like information in, which helps you search for commonalities and disagreements between your sources, which will help after you have finished compiling all of your sources to find the commonalities and disagreements that you can discuss in your paper. So if you think of a source this way, this item in context of the other items you have found. Next slide. So here we have a sample matrix from Northwestern State University of Louisiana, and you'll see that under the sources you have the 4 different studies which the person would use for it, and then they have different categories of how they may be similar or how they may be different. So after you've compiled all of your sources in here, a good place to look would be under the findings, the implications, and the limitations to find some commonalities and differences which you can discuss in your paper. Next slide.
So I'm actually going to show you a handout that might be helpful for you if you are working on a paper in the humanities. So give me just a second. Can you see that, Mahika?
Yes.
Great. So this particular handout was created by Dr. Leslie Lane, and she actually uses the handout for source analysis workshop. But I think that we can use it to synthesize as well. So we're glad to share this handout with you later tonight if you'd like. You can just let us know when we give you a survey. But basically, you would go through the handout and figure out and fill out each piece of information. Specifically, what do you know about the author, who the audience is? These are all sort of ways to ruminate on the resource that you're using. You'll really want to hone in on what is the main claim of the source, summarize it in your own words, and then here's a good spot to have sort of a meditation on how can I use this source? How does it add to my understanding of the argument that I'm working on? Next, how might this source relate to other sources that I have found? And that's sort of what Alexis was alluding to earlier. And then you could even pick out a couple quotations from the source that you might want to use in your paper. So you would repeat this process with each piece of research that you're looking at, and then you could put it together and sort of start to look for commonalities or differences. Just a moment, let me get this back.
So color coding is another way that you can help synthesize your work. So you color different pieces of evidence. While you're researching or reviewing research, a writer might say, each time I see a discussion about coercion, I'll mark it orange. And each time I see a discussion about poverty and subpar representation in the courtroom, I'll mark it yellow. So that starts to set up so you can visually see these 2 different arguments appearing maybe in one source, and then you see the same arguments appearing in the next source, and you can track that, and it really helps visual learners. Can we go to the next slide? So you don't simply rely on copying and pasting from sources, but you do add your voice, your commentary, your interpretation, discussion, or your analysis. But the color coding helps you really pick out those little trends across the sources. And it's sometimes you can use it as an alternative to a matrix. If you're a really visual person, you see that. Sometimes you can use it in addition if that's helpful to you. It really depends on your personal style. Color coding is my personal favorite. Can we go to the next slide?
Sure. And so I like that Julia mentions trends, because if you highlighted, if we're going back to that discussion of prisoners donating organs, and if you see several different pieces of research talking about poverty, and you've highlighted poverty each time in yellow, then when you put all of your sources together, you can see the discussions of poverty because they'll be color coded in yellow. One thing that I wanted to talk about is interpreting the research, because a lot of times students will synthesize and leave it, and we can't do that. We can synthesize in the research, but then we have to interpret it, which is what Julia was just talking about. So this is an example that you saw earlier, and I went ahead and highlighted some text or used mint green, actually, text to show you how the writer is interpreting or analyzing what they have researched. So again, Shannon Ross, who is currently serving a prison sentence, disagrees with ethics professor Lawrence Gostin. Whereas Gostin claims that prisoners could be coerced to donate organs, Ross argues that all donation is, in fact, coerced. So basically what's happened is the writer has paraphrased what Ross believes, what Gostin believes. Then the writer goes on to interpret. Perhaps Ross means that most people feel compelled to donate organs to loved ones, and that some may even fear judgment if they do not volunteer. Thus, coercion is part of the decision to donate organs, even for non-prisoners. So here the writer's not just relying on the sources, they're actually adding their own commentary, which is very important because you don't want your paper to be a copy-paste compilation where you're just dumping in information and your voice is absent. So we'd like to know what questions you have so far before we continue on. There's our works cited for this portion. So I'll stop sharing my screen to see what questions you might have. So just as an overview before we move forward, we've shown you that you can color code, you can use a synthesis matrix if you are a science writer, and you can also use a source analysis synthesis handout if you're working in the humanities. So now Mahika has a handout that she's going to share with a little bit more examples for us.
Okay, I'm going to present my screen, and then Jer, if you will just let me know.
Sure.
You can see everything. Are you able to see the handout?
I can see it.
Okay, cool. So let's see. So before we get a look at a few more examples, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of the do's and don'ts of synthesis. So when you're synthesizing, make sure you're not just relying on a copy and paste method of incorporating your sources, essentially. You really want to make sure that your sources feed off one another in more of a conversation type manner, just as Alexis mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then conversely, when you are synthesizing, you do want to make sure that you add your voice by interpreting or analyzing the information from your sources. So I think, in my opinion, doing so doesn't just allow you to provide some of your own original thought, but it also may increase the reader's comprehension of what's being conveyed in the sources, because a lot of this material that you'll find in scholarly articles can be kind of hard to make sense of at first glance. So now let's take a look at a good example of a synthesis. While Smith 2018 found that a neglectful parenting style adversely affects childhood development, Jones 2020 took it a step further and explored how this particular parenting style affects behavioral and psychological growth well into adulthood. So you want to notice how the two sources are kind of feeding off of each other and acknowledging one another in kind of a compare and contrast style. And then we'll take a look at a bad example of synthesis. So it reads, a neglectful parenting style negatively influences childhood development. Neglectful parenting affects individual attachment styles during childhood and adulthood. So make sure that you're noticing the quote dropping essentially, which is when you just drop direct quotes in without any connection of sources or synthesizing of sources, as well as no analysis or interpretation of those sources. Are there any questions regarding either of those examples or any of the do's and don'ts that I just went over? All right.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat now for you all a link to a Google form so that if you want us to email your professor that you attended, you can let us know on that form. You can also let us know if you'd like for us to email you copies of our handouts. And you can also let us know if this was helpful for you. So let me go back to the presentation. We just have a few more slides left.
So these are the Wilmer Writing Center's online hours, and Mondays through Thursdays we're open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Fridays we're open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and then Sundays we're open from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And you can reach us through the Writing Center GA at lynchburg.edu email, and then you can also contact the phone number below if you're having any problems with it. And then, so our appointment types, we have the asynchronous, which is not a live appointment. And then we have a synchronous appointment, which is called live on the online appointment book. And we do both types. Thank you, Jared. So whenever you go into the online appointment book, they're called live and asynchronous, but they're also called online and e-tutoring. So the e-tutoring are the asynchronous appointments where the student uploads their paper, assignment directions, and agenda. And then the tutors will go ahead and review your paper and send you the feedback. And then our online appointments are live where you can chat with the tutor using a video and a camera through the Writing Center online website. Next slide, please.
I think that's it. So one thing that I want to add to this discussion here is that if you are booking an e-tutoring appointment with the Writing Center, make sure that you upload your paper. We try to catch that if you don't, because we actually won't be talking to you. If you are sort of in the brainstorming phase or you have a lot of questions, I would suggest that you go ahead and do an online or live appointment so that you can talk with the tutor live. And if you can't get your camera to work or you can't get your microphone to work, there's a chat feature. It's a really nice program. So I'm going to go ahead and see what questions we might have, and then we will close out. Do you all have any questions? You can unmute and talk, or you can use the chat feature if you'd like. Okay. And so don't forget the Google form here so that we can let your professor know if you're getting extra credit for attending. And also you can let us know if you'd like for us to send the handouts your way. Of course, thank you so much for attending. And thank you, Abby and Knight-Capron Library, for always being such a good partner for Wilmer Writing Center. We really appreciate you all. And thanks to all the tutors. And thank you to everyone who came. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great night. Thank you.